1978. Cindy thrashed awake, her body breaking into a cold sweat, with heart palpitations radiating through her chest. It happened again. The nightmares were striking her at her most vulnerable, in the dead of night. Each instance was becoming increasingly frequent. The demons of her past had tiptoed again into her unconscious mind, ruthlessly taunting her while she slept. On the edge of a barren motorway, Cindy was alone in the hotel room she rented, the kind of place where the air conditioning gave out every so often, and the hinges of the entry door were so rusted you could practically watch them disintegrate. The buzzing light bulbs on the neon street sign outside flickered erratically. To a passerby, this place would look abandoned, but to Cindy it was somewhere just to rest her head. She only earned a small amount of money each day. She couldn't afford luxury accommodation or even something half decent. The tremors made her body ache, and she was upset that the idea of getting some rest was apparently too much to ask for, too much to expect. Sleeping used to be the only thing that served as an escape from the grim realities of her life. Her days and nights blended together as she mingled with the unsavoury in order to earn enough to just purchase something to eat, but only if she ran into the right people. As a significant member of the underground underclass, Cindy had a reputation. Many knew her name and face. Her high cheekbones and pouty bottom lip were the distinguishing characteristics of her appearance, and they were the only things that made her feel attractive anymore. Her line of work was a burden, requiring her to disconnect herself from everyday reality. She had spent years on autopilot, letting her life spiral deeper with every passing season into an abysmal rut. Cindy's ears began to ring loudly. The dead quiet of the hotel room created a deafening silence in her psyche. She clumsily pressed the buttons on the television set, bringing the screen to life, only to be met with a blast of static noise blaring, and bright white and grey flurries glittering the bright screen. Desperately, she twisted the knobs and nudged the little bunny ear antenna sitting on top of the TV set, but it was no use. These harsh sounds were too much for her to handle. She covered her ears and bolted for the door. She needed to get outside to hear something that didn't seem to be coming from her imagination. Another human voice, perhaps. An idea interrupted her train of thought. What if this was a nightmare too? Could she trust her mind? Now that she was standing on the damp pavement of the dilapidated hotel car park, she became aware that the incessant ringing had lessened. She took a deep breath of momentary relief, though it wasn't enough. She felt utterly abandoned. Terrified of what was lurking in the darkness around her and inside her mind, Cindy knew there was only one person left that could comfort her, her best friend, Anne. She and Anne had grown up together. They had sat next to each other in primary school. Both girls had constantly risked getting punished with their relentless chitter-chatter, and the two had remained close until their early adulthood when, inevitably, their life paths began to diverge. Anne chose the white picket fences and motherhood. In contrast, Cindy took the less respectable path. She rebelled against what was expected of her. At first, this felt empowering, but she soon learned there was no going back for a second chance. This was her life, and it was all very real. The only light in the distance was coming from a phone box. Cindy took a deep breath and shuffled towards the booth. She was silently hoping to hear her friend's voice. Anne could never solve her problems, but she was always there to at least listen and support her. Sometimes Cindy felt guilty that she didn't have the capacity within her to return that support to Anne. She knew her friend had ups and downs too. However, selfishly, Cindy thought she would take any of Anne's problems with a smile compared to those in her own life. Cindy yanked open the door of the call box, only to be greeted by more buzzing. This time it was high-pitched and whiny. She put a coin into the slot and dialed the phone number that she knew by heart, a sequence of digits she could never forget, even if she tried. Now feeling paranoid, she gazed through the glass of the call box. The contrast between the darkness outside and the bright light inside the box made sure her every move was on public display. Awaiting anxiously for her friend's answer, Cindy's foot involuntarily tapped away on the floor of the booth. Then she noticed the ringing tone had stopped, but there wasn't a voice at the other end of the line. It was almost as if someone had picked up at their end, but then had decided not to greet her. Cindy's heart began to race with the uncertainty. Anne? Another bout of silence filled the phone. Cindy didn't have any more coins to hang up and maybe call again, and so she painfully waited for a voice. It was her only chance. Finally, Anne's voice echoed in her ear. You can't keep doing this. But it didn't sound like her bubbly friend. This was a cold-hearted version of Anne. The voice was lifeless, without warmth. Cindy thought about trying to defend herself against the accusation, but Anne continued before she had the chance. You keep interrupting my life with your problems, she said sternly. I'm done being a bystander. Clean yourself up. It's time to face everything you've created. Cindy's legs weakened beneath her. Give me one more chance, Cindy stammered over her words, trying to invent an excuse. This life wasn't all her fault. Couldn't Anne see that? It's your life. Fix it, or you'll die trying, said the voice down the phone. And that was the last thing to come from her best friend's voice before the line went dead. Cindy dropped to her bony knees, drowning in sorrow. Each salty tear that ran down her cheek burned like a line of fire in a lush forest. Now she knew what it meant to be entirely alone. The last person she could count on, arguably the only one she truly cared for, had drawn a line in the sand. Their friendship had become just another fragment in the wreckage of her life, Cindy kept her eyes clamped shut and let her cries flow freely, no longer attempting to muffle her weeping. Once she caught her breath, Cindy became still and quiet, and then she noticed it was dawn. The sky outside the booth was no longer an eerie black. Instead, it had faded into a number of purples. The buzzing inside was now being drowned out by chirping birds in the distance. She picked herself up from the booth floor and then stepped into the outside air, deciding to head towards the tweeting sounds coming from a tall tree. She stood there and peered up the length of the trunk. She could see a small bird atop a thin branch, singing blissfully. A hopeful smile curled along her lips, and she turned to stare at the brightening sky. The sun was edging slowly above the horizon, breaking into the day. Cindy had seen plenty of birds, sunrises and sunsets in her time, but something about this one was different. Her surroundings had somehow grounded her. They made her feel real again, almost as if they were speaking to her, showing her that each day on earth is a fresh start. She realised that new beginnings could not exist without an ending of sorts. For her, yesterday was that ending. Today was her rebirth. Anne was right. This was her life, and she was the only one with the power to change her path.